Welcome to the 30-day novel NaNoWriMo series. This is day 3. My name is Lynn Johnston and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. So you've already written 2 days worth of your story. The story is moving forward. Yesterday you escalated the conflict that your protagonist was experiencing. Today we want to continue to escalate. We want to make the protagonist's problems continue to expand. We want to see that the protagonist's effort to solve those problems actually makes them worse in some way. And basically, you're going to want to think about your protagonist's flaw or wound or defining trauma. It really strengthens your character growth arc if the flaw that the character needs to overcome or the lesson that they need to learn during the story is something that's actually triggered by the story's main conflict. So right now, your protagonist is probably starting to notice, hey, there's a rip in the fabric of my everyday world, and I need to fix that. I need to find a way to get things back to normal, to where they were stable before you started the novel. Presumably, your protagonist was not having a perfect life, but had basically found a way to stabilize whatever life they were having coping mechanisms that allowed this person to be functional. And this is a point where, as they're starting to notice, hey, things are getting worse, things are falling apart a little bit, and whatever it is that the character needs to overcome in his own psyche or fix in his own psyche should be resurfacing a little bit. And it doesn't have to be big and dramatic. It could be a single line of interior monologue or dialogue that reveals that part of the protagonist's reaction to whatever is happening is coming from that place of being wounded or coming from that imperfection. And this is the point in the story where the protagonist is probably starting to realize that life is not just going to go back to normal on its own, that the protagonist is going to realize, oh gosh, I'm going to have to actually do something. I'm going to have to take action. And it's really important to have the protagonists taking action throughout the story. And the reason for this is that passive protagonists are boring. People to whom everything happens all the time are victims. And you don't want your protagonist to be a complete and total victim. They might be victimized in some way, but they need to be taking enough action so that the reader sees that they're a person who's making an effort, who's trying to get control of their life, because we basically see people who try to take control of their lives as admirable, and you want your protagonist to be admirable in some way so that the reader doesn't look at them and say, this is going to be 200 pages of this person getting screwed and not doing anything about it. And that's a terrible story. We don't want to tell that story. So even if the protagonist's efforts go nowhere and they make the problem worse, which they usually do until you get to the climax of the story, we want them still to be willing to try things. Other characters in the story, whether they're present or not, it's really important that you know what all your main characters are doing off screen, especially the antagonist. One of the things that happens over and over again in stories written by new writers is they get really immersed in whatever character they're writing right now, but they tend to forget the other main characters, and then you read the novel and you realize, hey, it looks like the antagonist has been doing nothing for 3 days while the protagonist has been taking this journey. And of course your antagonist is not going to be doing nothing. He's got his own goal, because your antagonist in his mind is the hero of his own story. So your protagonist should be trying to pursue whatever goal puts him at cross purposes with the hero, and you should know where the antagonist is in their journey so that when you cut back to the antagonist and see what he's doing or what she's been up to, it's clear that both the protagonist and the antagonist are doing things that are going to put them on a collision course. Conflict. This is the point in the story where I recommend that you start to isolate the protagonist from some of his usual resources or her usual resources. Narrow your protagonist's choices. This is the point where you're starting to build towards that first big plot point. and that crisis that is going to cause the protagonist to realize that they're going to have to commit to whatever goal you're giving them to pursue throughout the story. So while you're thinking about your conflicts, think about how these conflicts are going to be taking the protagonist away from the familiar and putting the protagonist in a situation where his usual coping mechanisms and his usual resources are not available, or maybe they are available, but they're no longer appropriate for the new problems that she or he is experiencing. Setting. Again, we always want to be thinking about if you want a setting that comes alive and you want the kind of setting that people find really memorable, and that you want reviewers to say, hey, your setting is practically a character in and of itself, you really need to think carefully each step of the way how your setting is going to be impacting your characters and how your characters interact with it. And setting can also include not just location, but also basically non-player characters, people, minor characters who show up that the main characters either interact with briefly or don't interact with at all, but just observe. So today I'd like you to ask yourself, how can the setting narrow your protagonist's options? How can the setting make it harder for your protagonist to deal with this new rip in his space-time continuum that he is struggling with? And also ask yourself, how can the setting trigger the protagonist's flaw, wound, or defining trauma? Story promise. I'm going to keep talking about story promise because it's extremely important that you make promises to the reader and that you keep them during the course of the story. That's one of the ways that you give your reader an emotionally satisfying experience. So let's look at character growth. What are you promising about character growth when we see your protagonist's flaw or wound or defining trauma come to the surface in what you're writing today? What are you hinting to the reader is going to happen? Are you promising the reader that this character is going to have to overcome his self-imposed exile in order to succeed in his quest? Are you promising to the reader that this is going to be a story of love overcoming all obstacles? It's a small thing, and it can be linked to your theme, or it can be not be linked to your theme. But if you hint to the reader what kind of story they're going to get from the protagonist's character growth arc, and then you satisfy that, that's one more level on which you're going to have a happy reader. So getting started, again, I just want to emphasize, because one of the awesome things about NaNoWriMo is it's giving you the opportunity to build a writing habit. I strongly recommend, if you haven't already chosen one, pick a pre-writing ritual. Pick some sort of warm-up exercise that you're going to do every day for the rest of the month. And you can have a collection of exercises. You don't want to get bored. So if you want to have 5 that you alternate between, whatever works for you. Also, you may want to reread a little bit of what you wrote yesterday just to kind of get back into that groove. But again, don't let yourself edit. And it's only day 3, so don't panic if it's not already starting to feel easier. It takes time to develop the writing habit. Every time you sit down and write, you're not just sitting down with your world and your characters, you're also sitting down with your fears. Because your characters in your world are projections of your psyche, and all those fears that you have that you don't think about when you're going about your day-to-day routine, they take advantage of the fact that you're writing, and they tend to insert themselves into your world. So you actually have to have a little bit of courage to sit down and write every day. And I want to tell you, it's okay for it to be uncomfortable. It's okay for you to feel anxious. You're not going to burst into flames or die as a result of sitting down there and feeling anxious and being afraid. So go ahead, let yourself feel the fear, and then do the writing anyway. And if you keep doing it, if you are willing to sit down with your anxiety every day and write anyway, eventually you're going to reach a point where that anxiety is not as intimidating anymore, and it gets easier to write, and you look forward to it. And eventually, I am told by writers who are more experienced than me that eventually the anxiety actually kind of becomes like an old friend who's just there while you're writing, and it's not something that It's not something that you have to panic over. It's just part of the writing process that you'll eventually get used to. After you write, of course, always celebrate your progress. You're doing something awesome by sitting down every day and committing to do this. It's a big deal. It's not a trivial thing to say, I'm going to write a novel in a month, and it's even less of a trivial thing to actually do it. So give yourself credit, give yourself a moment of kudos, savor the fact that you have actually achieved something worthwhile. And also remember to prepare for tomorrow. Make it easier to sit down and write by clearing your area out or getting your notes ready or brainstorming before you go to bed. Whatever it is that you're finding is making it easier for you to sit down tomorrow and write at the desk, do it tonight. So thanks for hanging out with me on day 3 of NaNoWriMo. I'm going to keep posting those videos. I look forward to hearing from you. I'd love to hear how your process is going and how the novel is unfolding. I wish you the best.